Hello and welcome to Spencer's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to talk about Bridgerton and specifically about what I didn't like about Bridgerton. Before we get into this discussion, I feel like I need a few disclaimers and warnings. The first one, big one, content warning. Adult content will be discussed in this video. Just like Bridgerton is not a series for children, this is not a video for children. Second, there will be spoilers. I am assuming that everyone watching this video has either seen Bridgerton, all 8 episodes, or has no interest in seeing it, or doesn't care about spoilers. Third, I am discussing Bridgerton purely as a television show. I have not read the books, so I am not going to be looking at this from an adaptation point of view. And 4, if Bridgerton is your favourite series in the world and you feel very protective of it, this might not be the video for you either. And the 5th disclaimer is that I am not coming to this drama as a complete historical novice. I am in fact a music historian, and the period that I research is exactly that period and exactly that place. So I am fairly proficient in discussions around the music of the early 19th century in Britain, and I am generally comfortable with the time period and what went on in society at the time. However, this video is not about historical accuracy. This has got nothing to do with how accurate or how inaccurate the things were that were portrayed in the series. And I think what Bridgerton does really well is to make it clear right from the beginning that this is not a traditional period costume drama. Right from the first saturated images that look like they're taken straight out of someone's Instagram feed, right from the first notes of the background music, right from the first glance at these sumptuous, colourful, glitzy costumes, you know that this TV show is not pretending to portray 1813 in an accurate way. And therefore I think that any critique of this show that focuses solely on historical accuracy is really missing the point. All of the characters in the show are entirely made up, with the exception of course of the Queen Charlotte. So there isn't really any damage, I think, that's done by the historical accuracy. I get frustrated, for example, when I see a biopic, a drama that's supposing to present real life and a real person, and when they take too many liberties with that, I have issues with that, but I have absolutely no issue with the concept of Bridgerton as a fantasy, regency, romance. And those are the words that we see all over the place. Fantasy, regency, romance. I want to talk about why, for me, that premise didn't work, why I think I was disappointed with Bridgerton as a fantasy, regency, romance. But first, I want to give a shout out to the things I really did enjoy about the series. Let's start with the obvious. It's beautiful. It is so pleasant to look at. It is, like I said, like a gorgeous, perfectly curated Instagram feed. The oversaturated colours, the gowns, the jewellery, they are all so beautiful to look at. The scenery is gorgeous. The people are stunning. I mean, I don't need to explain why this particular set of cast members is pleasant to look at. The whole aesthetic of the show I can totally get on board with. I found it very nice to look at. Like I said, the people, the sets, the costumes, even things like the furniture. As a music historian, obviously I paid close attention to the instruments, and the pianos they have and the harps they have in the show are so gorgeous. Very, very nicely done. The second thing I really liked about the show is actually the mystery aspect. The question of who Lady Whistledown was. That was really the one thing that kept me watching throughout the series, because I wanted to know. I wanted to know who this gossiping author is who takes so much pleasure in the truths about the society that she's writing about. I enjoyed that mystery so much, and I didn't guess it right. I was convinced that it was the dressmaker. And I was convinced from like the third episode onwards that it was going to be the dressmaker who would turn out to be Lady Whistledown. And then when that plot twist came at the end, I was truly surprised. And it was a very satisfactory ending and twist of that central mystery. I also really enjoyed some of the characters, and I think the standout character was obviously Queen Charlotte. What a presence in every scene that she was in. What an amazingly powerful, snarky and witty and still flawed character she was. I really enjoyed seeing her in much of the scenes that she was in. Just a beautiful presence. Out of the younger generation, the younger cast of characters, I really liked Eloise Bridgerton. I wish she was the main character of this. She was definitely the one that I think I could identify with most, and her frustrations and her fears of growing up and her annoyance with the theatre of it all, I thought was very enjoyable to watch. I personally had problems with the three Bridgerton men, the older brothers, but that is my own personal problem because I am face blind, I have prosopagnosia. I genuinely could not tell them apart in any of the scenes, and when they were all three together I had no idea who was who. So that is more of a personal problem. I can't really blame the TV series for making men that look the same to me because of my face blindness problem. What I really wanted to talk about and what the title of this video is, well, actually I don't know exactly what I'm going to call this video. I might call it What I Didn't Like About Bridgerton. I might find a better title, but anyway, the immersion aspect didn't work for me on several levels. If we take this concept of fantasy regency romance, I think Bridgerton hit the fantasy and Bridgerton hit the romance. Even though romance is not really my genre, at least of literature, I have to say I haven't watched much romance on television. And I think that is because as a genre it isn't very well produced, there isn't a lot of it, and it is generally not given the sort of budget and publicity and reach that Bridgerton has had. So in that regard, I am keen to explore more romance on TV and on film. If you have any recommendations, tell me in the comments. So the romance aspect I thought was fairly well done. Obviously, it's a very, I think it's been described as the horniest show on Netflix right now, and there's a lot of sex scenes, there's a lot of general horniness, there's a lot of kind of eroticism and intimacy, and that's a big part of the plot and of the characters and of the entire show. Now, the fantasy in fantasy regency romance I thought was reasonably well done. It was obviously centered on the lives and love lives of very rich, very privileged people, and that's kind of what you want in that kind of a show. You want escapism, you want to watch a show that's about a life that you will never be able to lead. I'm never gonna be the belle of the ball in 19th century London, but I can escape into a fantasy world where that is the case. And Bridgerton really plays on that aspect. It is kind of a bit of an in-joke, I guess, in the story itself that the Bridgerton children are so perfect. Daphne is this beautiful, rich, intelligent woman who gets what she wants in the end. And the same goes for the men of the show. They are these sexy, independent, incredibly wealthy men who flirt and get laid and have the best time at London parties. However, the fantasy element of the show was weirdly disrupted for me in some very specific scenes, and almost all of them involve the character of Marina, the unfortunate Miss Thompson, who from the beginning of the show is known to be pregnant, or as she likes to say, with child. And she is not afforded the same fantasy life and the same luxury that all of the other characters get. There's this really weirdly jarring scene where her hostess, Lady Featherington, takes her to the poor part of town, because obviously there's only one in London, and shows her some children who were on the street and begging. And apart from the fact that that scene itself, with its campness and its stereotypical Charles Dickens style aesthetics, didn't look like a sincere attempt by the filmmakers to portray 19th century poverty, but it also didn't fit in with the overblown, over-the-top aesthetics of the rest of the series. So on the one hand, you're in this fantasy world where everyone's rich and beautiful, and then this one character is not afforded the luxury of living in that same world, and she's taken out and shown this poverty, which is supposed to be her future if she doesn't find a husband who will accept her and her child. And I find that really jarring. And then I got the same sense from the infamous attempted abortion scene, where she mixes up some herbs in the kitchen and drinks the tea and then faints from it. And again, those two scenes, both of them to do with this one character that seems to live in a completely different world to the other characters. All of the other characters get to enjoy sex, and they get to enjoy flirting, they get to enjoy parties, and they get to enjoy the hunt for marriage. And she is punished because she had premarital sex and is pregnant at the beginning of the story. And she is punished by being taken out of the fantasy world. And if Bridgerton is trying to make a social commentary out of that, about how women are not afforded the same luxuries as men, then I think it's doing it quite badly in that regard. I don't think that point, if it was a point to begin with, was driven home very well, and I found it very strange and a serious break from the rest of the show's aesthetics and the rest of the show's atmosphere. So if we go back to this concept of fantasy Regency romance, the romance, fine. Again, I'm not too familiar with the tropes of the genre, but it worked very well for me. The fantasy, fine, but with that caveat of Marina specifically. Regency was where I just didn't think the show did the period any justice. And let me reiterate, this is not about accuracy. I don't mind that the characters wear heavy eye makeup and they wear their hair down and they wear jewel encrusted gowns and that there aren't any bonnets to be seen anywhere in the show. I don't mind that the show takes liberties with the period that it's set in, but I wish they had been able to preserve the core of the Regency period a little bit more. Because if you think about the entire show, it may as well have been set in 1920, in 1960, it may be set in 1870, it could have been set in 1755. There is no defining of this period. The show, the plot, the stories, the characters would have functioned just as well in any vaguely historical period. There is nothing about the story or the characters that screams Regency to me. And I was taken out of that, and I kept thinking about why this particular story had to be set in the Regency when nothing about it demanded it to be set in the Regency. And the things that would have made it stereotypically Regency era were not in the show. For example, we see Queen Charlotte, and she takes up quite a large role, and as I've said, she was my favourite character in this entire show. But where is the actual Prince Regent? The period is named after his function as the head of state after his father was not capable of leading the country anymore. So the Prince Regent was a larger-than-life character of his time. He would have been at all of these balls, he would have been at all of these parties, he would have flirted with every single Bridgerton, he would have been in likely the majority of sex scenes, and maybe that wouldn't have fitted in with the aesthetics of the show, because by 1813 he was kind of a not very attractive middle-aged man who was just a notorious flirt and playboy. But it would have made the show actually feel like it's set in the Regency. The language took me out of it as well, but I will admit that that is probably because I'm more familiar with at least Regency written language than the average viewer. I spent day in, day out looking at texts from that era, both fiction but mainly non-fiction, so I know what people sounded like, at least in their letters. Obviously, there's no way for us to know how people actually spoke in the time, but the writing seemed very much based on an American's idea of what British aristocracy sounds like in the 19th century, and that took me out. There were some phrases in there that just didn't make any sense. There were some contrived turns of phrase, a lot of use of ones. It is often said that one's duty is to one's family when one's heart would really rather enjoy a good feast. I don't know, I'm just making this up. This is not an actual quote from the TV show, but there were a lot of these phrases where it was just a bit too much, kind of like with the set design. It was a very maximalist approach to language, and again, that didn't really scream Regency to me. It screamed Hollywood idea of what British people sounds like. I also didn't really feel the London setting, and that was because while the sets were beautiful and very bright, I didn't see the typical London houses. I didn't see the architecture that I would expect. I didn't see the busy and bustling streets. And that was a bit of a shame, but I also understand that they wanted to abstract the setting to make it more fantasy and less real world. The whole show is set around this idea of the season, you know, young women going to London for the season and expecting to finish the season with an engagement or ideally a marriage. But the season was the winter months. I mean, it extended into the spring, but I felt like there was no actual anchoring of that time period. There was no snow, there was no rain, and of course that is all part of the fantasy aspect because beautiful weather makes for beautiful pictures. But why not set the story in the actual season of the year that it's set in? You could have made some really gorgeous aesthetic sets out of the autumn and winter. Unfortunately, again, the fact that this is clearly set during an eternal summer takes the viewer out of the actual time period that it's supposed to be set in. So I was trying really hard to enjoy Bridgerton, but the weird refusal to set a fantasy Regency romance in the actual Regency, with the only nod to the Regency actually being, I don't know, the shapes of the men's costumes, the vague idea of the London season, the presence of Queen Charlotte. Those were the only real things that anchored the show in the time period that it is supposed to be set in. And that took me out of the story. And then the thing that made it really quite annoying for me was the music. Again, disclaimer, I am a music historian, I am a music nerd, but I also need to put a disclaimer there that I love modern music in period drama. I love it. I think Gentleman Jack did it probably best. Harlots, if you've seen that, ooh, the music was so good. Both of these shows combine, I guess, historical musical tropes with modern approaches to music. So the compositions will sound very, very, very modern, but they will be played on orchestra instruments. Or what Harlots often did was just straight up add some heavy metal or some electro in there and somehow make it work, because the modern music either clashes with the scene or it enhances the turbulence and the emotions of the scene. And in Gentleman Jack, it's a little bit more subdued, but it works in the same way to really enrich the story. In Bridgerton, I didn't like the way the music was done. A lot of the time when you had music in the ballroom scenes, it was string quartet covers of modern 21st century pop songs. And that didn't work for me. First of all, it didn't work within the scene. People were dancing to these modern pop songs played by a string quartet, but then the camera would pan to the musicians and you'd see a chamber ensemble, not a string quartet. There would be an image of someone playing the flute, but you wouldn't actually hear a flute being played, and that really took me out of the scene. Rhythmically, it didn't work. These modern pop songs clashed with the dancing motions, but not in a pleasing way, just in an irritating way for me. And the whole vibe I got from these string quartet covers was of a 21st century wedding reception, where the bridal pair says, hey, we really want a string quartet because it's classy, but we also really want to hear our favorite songs. And so they get a string quartet to play covers of their favorite songs. That's what it sounded like to me, and it didn't work for the show. However, the string quartet covers of the modern pop songs was the only interesting thing that the music did, because the rest of the time it was very traditional period drama music. I have seen a lot of opinion on Twitter about the music and lots of people really like it, and I don't get it. However, it is a question of taste. If you really enjoyed the string quartet covers of pop songs, then that is totally fine and valid, because our tastes are different. But for me, the music disrupted the show and it took me out of the period. I think you could have done some really clever things with music from the Regency and turning it into over-the-top backing music, because everything else is over the top. The dresses are over the top, the hair is over the top, the backgrounds, the sets are over the top, the editing's over the top, the sex is over the top, all of it is over the top. So why be so boring with the music? These kind of little elements really took me out of Bridgerton, and in the end I couldn't really enjoy the story. I couldn't enjoy the romance. I couldn't enjoy the characters because I felt like it was so unsettled in its time and place. And I watch period dramas, like most of you, to escape into a different time period, but this show didn't make me escape into a different time period. It just kind of was low-level grating the entire time through. I think the concept of Bridgerton is fantastic. The aesthetics worked, but the Regency aspect of the fantasy Regency romance did not work at all for me. And this is what I disliked about Bridgerton. Before I finish this video, I want to implore you again to go and watch Harlots if you enjoyed Bridgerton, because it has a lot of the same things. It has fun, bright costumes that look kind of historical, but probably aren't. It's got a lot of sex. Harlots, as you might be guessing from the title, is set around a brothel. It is not set in the Regency, it's set a few decades earlier in the 18th century, but it's also bridges the gap between being very anchored in this time period, but at the same time feeling super modern. And the music, the sets, the costumes, and the characters all add to that beautiful, glorious mix. Harlots needs the amount of publicity and the amount of adoration that Bridgerton is getting. Watch Harlots. If you enjoyed Bridgerton, or if you didn't enjoy Bridgerton, just watch it. It's not on Netflix, so I think. I watched it on the BBC iPlayer because it ran on the BBC, but I think in America it is on Hulu. Anyway, this video is not sponsored by Harlots. Let me know what you think of Bridgerton. I think there is a lot of things that one can discuss about this show. I didn't even touch on the actual problematic plot points. I've seen people talk about some really seriously unsettling parts of the romance plot, and I am not qualified to talk about that. However, have a look around on the internet if you're interested. There is a lot of things you can say about the plot, and that I, again, didn't really go into too much. I wanted to talk about the aspect of immersion and immersion in the Regency and why that just wasn't the case for me. But let me know how you feel about that, especially if you've read the books as well. Tell me if the books were a little bit more immersive, if they felt more grounded in the Regency era or not. And of course, as always, be respectful. We have different opinions about the TV show, that's fine. Thank you for watching. Bye.